What a schus it is. I was here last year, and they invited me back. So that's always a good sign. Although sometimes they tell us the story with the chazan who, there's a concert. There are people who go to chazanim concerts. I know it's hard to wrap your head around. Anyway, so he does this piece, and they say, encore. And he does it again. And they go, encore. 4 or 5 encores. He says, how many times do you want me to do this piece? And they said, till you get it right. So hopefully I won't do too well today. I love coming back here. Yeah. You know, when you read these parashios, you realize you're getting into mood for Pesach, right? Obviously, these are the parashios of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and these weeks are setting us up for a lot of the psukim that are in the Haggadah, and we start getting ready. Now, I don't know about you, but from the Pesach Seders that I've had a chance to observe, they all follow the same basic thing, right? They first you have to fight over the seating. I want to sit next to Abba. I don't want to sit next to Abba. You know what I mean? And where everyone's going to sit. After you finish fighting over the places, now you have to fight over the chairs. Because when I do Hasebra, everybody wants the ones with the arms, but there's only 2 of them, and your father gets 1. So now you're fighting over the 1 chair. Then everyone's fighting over the pillows. Why'd you take the pillows from my bed? You know, why don't you take your own pillows? Because I'm going to spill wine on it. I don't want to spill it on my own pillow, you know? So you're trying to lean on a pillow without an arm. It doesn't work so well. But okay. Now comes the famous grape juice wine question. Do you want wine? Do you want grape juice? I'll have a little bit of wine, add some grape juice to it. How much can I dilute it? And there's this long discussion till we finally have all of the cups set up, and now we're ready to start, right? And they make Kiddush. And they invite other people to make Kiddush who are not so good at saying Kiddush. And so that takes, now it's about 11 o'clock at night. So now it's Manish Tana. And everybody under the age of 25 says Manish Tana. And they say it in English, and they say it in Hebrew, and they say it in Yiddish, and they say it in Spanish, and they say it in Swahili, and it just goes on and on forever. That's not the worst part. The worst part is the 4-year-old who sits like this, and they go ahead, Manish Tana. And he won't get down, but he won't say it either, and so there's another 25 minutes, right? Okay, so now we go on, and at this point, everyone's had enough. Everyone's had enough. They're done, you know? Everyone's hungry, everyone's tired. You know that your Seder is in trouble when your father starts assigning roles to the Arba Banim, you know? Russia, Mahu Omer. So there's somebody who has this role in every Seder. Sometimes it's an uncle, sometimes it's a cousin, sometimes it's a guest, but you start to sense that we are reaching the breaking point, and they go, that's it, let's go. And everyone nods. Rabbi Gamliel Omer. Anyone who doesn't understand these 3 things are not Yotzei. And that's it. By this point, a burnt piece of matzah is starting to look good to us. You understand? That's how hungry we are. Boy, give me a chunk of horseradish. I'll just eat that at this point. I don't really care. I'm so burnt out. So the whole second half of the Haggadah, nobody is really paying attention to. Because even if you had a yeshiva guy, and he pulls out his first box of notes that he prepared, and he has 25 Vartlach on Holach Ma'anya. And you're like, just can't believe this, right? But by this point, no one's paying attention anymore. Nobody really cares, you know? And I, when you have like this one happy camper, and he's like, I heard an idea on this. Save it for the meal. Right? Okay, so you all had the same Seder as I did. Okay, I feel better now. Anyway. So there's one part of it over there that my father used to run through, and he had this like old English translation, and I'll never forget. Rabbi Josie the Galilean would say, how do you know that they got 10 plagues in Egypt and 50 plagues on the sea? Yeah, because it says, Vayomru hachartumim el paro. I can't see a thing over here. I'm just making it up as I go along. Anyway. Hashem. Etzbe Elokim he. He says, this is the finger of God. Pop quiz. When do the Charatumim say that? Vakinim. Excellent. Yeah. V'yahayamahu omer, v'yar Yisrael es hayad hagdoila asher osa Hashem Mitzrayim. And they saw the hand of Hashem at the Yam Suf. Now here's the cheshbon. Kama lokvu be'etzba, 10 makos. So 5 fingers, that's 50. And then we push it up to 200 and 250 because we make how many makos there were in Mitzrayim, either 40 or 50, right? Because every makkah had sub-makos associated with it, because with the Tzvardeya, for example, besides them jumping all over the place, you also had the noise. You also had, when they died, the terrible smell that they made. Okay, so there's makkahs inside of makkahs. But this first drasha seems to me a little strange. Esser makos were done with an etzba. A hand has 5, so that should give us 50, right? That's the cheshbon the Bala Hagoda makes. I should say Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he brings down. Here's my problem, and you already pointed it out. Kingdom comes along, and V'yasu hachartumim belotehem. By the way, this is Perik Ches Pasuk Yud Dalid. Not that I think anyone's taking notes. It's just that Pesach Kron, who I sold a bunch of my tapes to, he gave me all of his for free, but I sold them to him, and should have a refuah shlema. So he says to me, "You never give any Myra Makomos when you speak." I said, "Yeah." He says, "No, sometimes I want to look up the vort that you're saying." I said, "That was amazing." So now whenever I speak, I always throw in my Myra Makomos because of my good friend Pesach Kron, which is one of the many things I learned from him. The other thing he said is, don't name drop famous people that you know. It's really just, really tacky. And he told me he heard this from his friend Rabbi Frand. So I'm just... That's it. If you get 80%, you're doing great. Don't worry about it. Nobody gets all the jokes. Anyway... They couldn't do it. Why? Because kishuv doesn't work on anything smaller than a barley corn. Right? Just, you should know that. Yeah? But the yakinim ba'adama ba'behema, v'yomra tumim el paro, etz velokimhi. V'chazek lev paro, v'losham alem kasher dibar Hashem. Now, it would seem to me that this should be the end of the game. The Charatumim said, listen, I know black magic. This ain't black magic. Yeah, can I turn water into blood? I can turn water into blood. Can I bring a bunch of frogs, call the frogs together? Yeah, I don't know how to make dirt turn into lice. So, I don't understand. At that point, why didn't Paro just say, okay, game, set, match? So, the reason is because, as you know, there was a cycle to the Makos. There was one Makkah where he gave a warning for a week before it came. Second Makkah, he gave a warning for a week. The third Makkah, it was no Hasra. It just happened. And that's what happened over here. There was no Boel Paro. There was no warning. So this is a very important concept over here. So he says, Etzbe Elokim. Do you remember when Moshe first comes? He says, who is Hashem? Who's this Yud-K, Vav-K guy? Yeah? I never heard of him. But Elokim, everybody knew Elokim. And the Mepharshim explained an interesting thing. If you studied Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, there's a pantheon of gods. And this is the god of rain, and this is the god of crops, this is the god of wine, this is the god of beauty. There's different gods for everything. Only the Norse have a god of mischief. I don't know why exactly that is, but he has been in a lot of movies. So, It's hard to take the gods seriously when they start appearing in movies. But anyway, so they worship the pantheon of gods, but they used to recognize that there was a master god who created them. And that's why, we just had a Sarah B'Teves, came out on Friday, the only tiniest that can be on a Friday. It can even come out on Shabbos. The calendar doesn't let it, but if it comes on Shabbos, he would do it. Because it's really a combination of 3 Tanaisim, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th. What happened on the 8th? Ptolemy HaMelech forced the Jews to translate the Torah into Greek, and they all made similar changes. One of the changes they made is, instead of saying, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim va'aretz, they changed it to Elokim bara bereshis es hashamayim va'aretz. Why? Because he was afraid that they would think there's a master God called Bereshis. He created Elokim, which they would read as Elohim, the gods, and then the gods ran everything else. So, since this is not Kishuf, he said, for some reason I can't explain, Elokim, the master God, decided to suddenly turn the dust into lice. I don't know why. Now, Moshe and Aaron are going to turn around and take credit for it, but if they did, they would have told us beforehand. So that's why he wasn't so impressed. But the Etzba Elokim is only going on one Makkah. Ad Kedei Kach, that when you come to the 5th Makkah, which is Dever, yeah. V'yom Hashem Moshe bel Paro, yeah. Hine Yad Hashem Haya v'miknecha Hashem b'sadeh. It says over here Yad Hashem. And that's only one makkah. It doesn't say over here that it's 50 makkahs. Not only that, on this the Gra says, the Vilna Gaon says, why is the 5th makkah called Yad Hashem? Because since you see each makkah is called an etzba, when you reach the 5th makkah, it's Yad Hashem. And so he doesn't learn Yad Hashem as being 5 times as many as 10 makkos. So what's going on over here? What's this concept of Yad Hashem, etc.? So we have to try to understand this on a level that hopefully will make sense to us. And as always, I was once in a shir with Rabbi Shapiro, where he says, it says in Pirkei Avos, Lilmod Amanas La'asais. You have to learn in order to do. I have to tell you, I've had the schus to speak to many different audiences for many years. And when I would ask people, what is the most frustrating thing about your Jewish education, they would say, it has nothing to do with my life. It's not relevant to my life. Every kid who starts learning Gemara asks the Rabbi this question. What Gemara are you guys doing? Bava Metzia, right? Everyone knows this. Rabbi, why am I learning this? I don't have an ox and I'm not planning on buying one. I don't run through the streets with pictures, If I decide to divorce my wife, I'll do it in Beis Din. I won't throw the get from my roof into her chotzer where it catches on fire on the way down, Why am I learning this? So I'm sure you've all had different educational things. I asked this once to a kid. I said, did you ever ask this question to your Rebbe? He says, yeah. What did he say? Be quiet, you mechutzev. I said, okay. That's an answer. That works on one level. No question. Certainly solves the problem. But he said, this is what Rabbi Shapiro said. Lilmad amanas la'asais means everything you learn has to be lemaisa. It has to turn into what's the there for. I have to do something with it. It's such an amazing thing because most people do not learn Torah that way. It's an academic experience, right? There was this mashkiach where they were learning Baba Kama. So what did he do? He put a chair in the doorway to the beis medrash. So what did all of these budding Talmidei Chacham do? They all, moved around it. So he gave them a few minutes to start learning, and then he gives a clap. He says, Rabbi, say, what are we learning? Baba Kama. Yeah? Which parak? First parak. Which sugya? Bor Bereshis HaRabim. He says, you sit here learning it all day, and when you actually see a Bor Bereshis HaRabim, you don't move it out of the way? You're just learning this and it's not touching your life in any way? That's not Torah. Torah has to be lumad amanas la'asais. A friend of mine, he told me his brother, when he went to medical school, the doctor who was teaching about lung cancer was a chain smoker. So he's going, you look at this x-ray, you can see the diseased lungs over here, totally disconnected, Bertrand Russell, who was a mathematician and philosopher, was being offered the seat of ethics in NYU, but he was a very unethical person. He did a lot of bad stuff. So they said to him, Professor Russell, how can we make you a professor of ethics when you're not ethical? And he said, when I taught math, no one demanded that I be a square, a circle, or a triangle. So I can teach it, I just don't have to live it. Torah doesn't work that way. Everything that I learn has to be lumad amadas la'asais. Ad kedei kach, and here was the example he brought. The second pasuk in the Torah. V'ha'aretz ha'is ha'tov v'vohu, and the world was void and emptiness. V'choshech al pnei sahom, and the darkness was upon the deep waters. And he looks at us and says, what's the la'asais of that pasuk? The answer isn't that important, but I'll tell it anyway, because people get annoyed to me when I leave these things out. I'll tell you another Pesach Krohn story. When I took my kids to go and visit him the first time, so he says, I heard you have this whole system for preparing a shiur. He says, yeah, I have every story on a card, and then I have the cards numbered, and then I have my notes, and I stick a number on the card onto my notes so I know which one to do. My kid's like, that's amazing. He says, well, what does your father do? He goes, he just talks. He says, doesn't he forget stuff? All the time. Sometimes I come to the end of the shiur and I realized I never told the punchline. I never answered the question that I started with. But it doesn't matter because no one was listening anyway. So, forgot to take my Ritalin today, I'm sorry. Anyway, and I'm not being facetious. I have ADD and dyslexia and like every other learning disability. They didn't know when I went to school. They just thought I was stupid and lazy. Now, as it turns out, I'm also stupid and lazy, but that's not the problem, But my mind just wanders. It's the ADD. I once had a kid in my class who was ADD. I was teaching him, and he told me a joke. He says, how many kids with ADD does it take to change a light bulb? I said, how many? He says, want to ride my bike? And we both look at each other and go. Anyway, lumad amanas la'asais, that's it. Got it. So whatever you learn has to be lemaisa. So he says, what's the lemaisa of that pasuk? Lo l'tohu bra alma. The world was not created to be empty. You have to build the world. But that made such an impression on me because it meant that everything you learn, every halacha, every Rashi, every piece of Gemara, no matter how esoteric it might be, it has to turn back into reality. It has to have, it can't just be in the realm of thought, it has to be Metzias. Look at that, Elu Metzias. Anyway, look how smooth that went. But one of the reasons, they asked Moshe Feinstein, why do we start with Elu Metzias? Why don't we do brachos, which is more relevant to kids? So he says, because teach kids from the time that they're little that if you find something, give it back. Teach them basic morality, So everything that we learn has to, in some way, tie back in. So what's the message over here? Etzbe Elokim, Yad Hashem, all these things going on. So I think the answer is the following. Between me and you, 5 fingers is not a hand. 5 fingers is 5 fingers. They're all individual fingers, right? They're not a hand. What makes it a hand? What makes it a hand is when they all are working together in a system. Or, to put it another way, when it talks about the Dever, it says Yad Hashem. But the pasuk Rabbi Yossi Aglili is quoting is V'yar es hayad hagadola asher asa Mitzrayim. The hand. What's the difference? The difference is like this. Lots of things happen. And we live in a world where it's very easy to look at things as a coincidence. There's a story in Navi, which you know, right, Malachim, where Yehoshua said that anyone who rebuilds Yericho, they'll bury his children. So this guy decides he's going to rebuild Yericho. He's got 10 sons. When he laid the foundation, the first son died. When he put up the walls, the second son died. And one by one, he's watching his children die until he puts up the gates of the city and his 10th son dies. How could he explain this? Coincidence. Yeah? The Rav of Kletsk tells a story where he says they were starting a reform school in the town to pull the kids away from Torah. There was no reform in the town. These 10 people got together to build this school specifically to try to destroy the religious character. So the Rav of the town, it turned out later it was him, but he was writing the story, but he didn't mention himself, said, if you don't stop this, one of you will die every month. At the funeral of the 9th, 9 months later, the 10th said, it's a coincidence. So people look at events and things and they don't put them together. They think we live in a random universe of mikra. And let's be very clear, right? Next holiday coming up is Purim. Tu B'Shvat, but okay. Anyway, that's basically an opportunity for you to eat dried buxa and break all of your teeth. You know what I mean? So it was good when you were a kid because you can get a buck for each tooth. You know what I mean? I only got a quarter. But anyway, hardly paid to knock your teeth out. But now already $1, it might be worthwhile. But anyhow, so comes Purim. What's Purim the battle against? It's the battle against Amalek. Where does Amalek appear on the scene? How do they first appear? When Bnei Yisrael says, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin. Does God really care about us? How many times have people asked that question? Does God really care about us or not? It's just a question. I don't believe God's really with us. And Rashi says, guys, Eser Makos, Kriyas Yamsuf, the Mun, all the nisim and the flows that you're surrounded by the Anoni Akava, and you still don't know whether God's here with you or not. That maybe you've been abandoned. Amalek attacks, and suddenly we cry out, Hashem, please save us. And Hashem says, oh, you remember where I am, which is unfortunate. It's an unfortunate thing because it's usually tragedy that motivates the Jewish people more than good times, which is such a sad thing. I had a secular businessman in Chicago say to me, most Jews have never heard of Sheva Brachos, but they all know how to say Kaddish, because the one thing we Jews do well is mourn, but we're not so good at celebrating, which Mati Berger says the big problem with Judaism is that people only go to Shul on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. They should go on Simchas Torah and Purim. They'd see a whole different religion. When you see it differently, when you can appreciate it that way. I heard this story from Reb Meir Horowitz, who's now the Boston Rebbe in Har Nof. Boston is a really cool Hasidus because everybody can be a Rebbe. There's like the Boston Rebbe here, the Boston Rebbe there, the Boston Rebbe, every place. I just don't think there's one in Boston, but every other place there's a Boston Rebbe, And he told this story years ago that this Polish peasant decides to convert to Judaism. Now, Hasidim have a big Suda, like a big tish, a big Suda on Rosh Chodesh and on every Yontif. So he converts just before Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So there's a Suda Rosh Chodesh Shvat, there's a Suda Tu B'Shvat, there's a Suda Adar Aleph, there's a Suda Purim Kotten, there's a Suda Rosh Chodesh Adar Beis, and then there's Purim, right? Another Suda. There's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, And then there's a whole week of Pesach, a Suda after Suda. Yeah? Then it's Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Then it's Pesach Sheni. Then it's Lag BaOmer. Then it's Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And then it's Shavuos. So one of his old friends sees him and says, so, how's it being a Jew? He says, it's the greatest thing in the world. He says, these people make a party every 2 weeks. He says, really? No, sometimes more. And there's a lot of drinking and food. It's just the greatest thing in the world. I'm so glad I became a Jew. So his friend goes to the rabbi. He wants to fast track this. He doesn't want to miss out. And he gets it done right after Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. 2 weeks later, Shavas B'Tammuz. 2 weeks after that, the 9 days. A week after that, Tisha B'Av. He goes to his friend and says, what happened? Because it's just not the same religion since you joined. So people turn around and they say, it's just not the same thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care about us. And that was Amalek's whole plan. Amalek b'gematria is Suffolk. Amalek wanted us to believe, Korach b'derech, Mikra, we bumped into him. They forced march from the south of Eretz Yisrael, hundreds of miles, to bump into us. But they wanted to make it look like a coincidence, to make us think, you're not special. Hashem doesn't care about you. There's nothing unique about you. And so, very often Jews believe this. And so when things happen in their life, I heard a frum person say something that was so incredibly painful. Whatever happened, something happened. And he said, God played a cruel trick. And my wife looks at me and says, God doesn't play cruel tricks. That's the Greek gods, the Roman gods, they play tricks on people. HaKadosh Baruch Hu plays a cruel trick? It's their way of saying that, like, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care about you. You're nobody special. I want to tell you a very important thing. It's an important thing that you have to know in life. The Yetzer Hara doesn't want to get you to do a chait. He's the busiest malach out there. He says the Gemara, he's the Yetzer Hara, and as the Yetzer Hara he tempts you. He's also the Satan. As the Satan he accuses you. And he's also the Malach HaMaves, and then he carries out the sentence. He's also the Sarah Shal Esav. He's very busy. Very busy malach. So he doesn't want to just get you to do a chait. He wants you to give up. And you know what he says? You're nobody special. You don't make a difference. Trust me, if you believed that you could daven and heal the sick and give children to the childless and give parnasa to people who can't make a living and bring the geula, you would daven totally differently. But you don't believe it. You know why? Because the Satan says, Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to listen to you. You daven with so much kavanah, you so this, you so that. He wants you to give up and think you're not special. I heard this idea from Henach Leibowitz, who was Rosh Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim many years ago. We blow 100 kolos. Why do we blow that last kol? The Aravevis has Satan, to confuse the Satan. Why? Because he hears that last tekiah and he thinks it's the shofar of Mashiach. So I asked him, Henach, 2,000 years he's still falling for the same trick? Tell him to buy a machzor. He can get an art scroll. It's written right there. He's being fooled? And he says, the Satan isn't foolish. We are. Because we don't understand how close we are to making that to Kabbah Shofar Gadol. We are right at the point where we could bring the Geula, but we don't believe it. I remember when I was learning Chavetz Chaim here in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yarchei told the story. He says, when I was a little kid, I went to the zoo, and the lion roared, and I got scared. And I said to the zookeeper, can he break out of that cage? And he says, yeah, but don't worry, he doesn't know it. And looked at us and said, that's every one of you. You have no idea how powerful you are because more than anything, the Yetzer Hara wants to convince you that you don't count, so you don't fight. So you don't try. Because if we all really understood our koyach, Rabbi would often say, people would say, what do you want from me? I'm just a human being. just a human being. You're higher than the Malachim. When Adam Rishon was created, the Malachim was singing Shira to him, just a human being. You understand the koyach you have? But we don't see a system. Here's a makkah, there's a makkah. This took place, that took place. We don't tie them together. It's not that there's a finger. And if I look at one makkah, 10 makkahs, 50 makkahs, it doesn't make a difference. They're all just a finger. They're just unrelated. The Moshe Shapiro used to give a shir on Motzi Shabbos to his close Talmidim. Rabbi Tatz writes about this, where he would invite everybody to ask a question. Okay, this one had a question on Chumash and Rashi. This one had a question on Halacha. This one had a question on a Gemara. This one had a question on a Tosfos. This one had a steer in the Rambam. This one had a question in Kabbalah. And when they were all done, he gave one shir on the parsha, on one idea, and that answered all the questions. So someone asked him once, how could that go? And this is his mashal. When you look at this, it looks like there's 4 separate fingers. When you go down deeper, you'll see it's a hand. That's exactly what Rabbi Yossi Glili is trying to tell us. Every individual makkah, that's just a makkah. There's something happened here, something happened there. I don't see a system. Rabbi Yehuda Nos Mehem Simonim, the Tzach Hadash B'Achav. What was he telling us? There's a system. The first 3, the next 3, the last 4. There's a system taking place, whether you realize it or not. But very often we don't see a system. We don't know what's happening. So, in Egypt, we only saw an etzbah. It didn't matter whether it was 10 makkos or 40 makkos or 50 makkos. We only saw a finger. We didn't see a whole system. At the Yam Suf, that's why, by the way, at Yetzias Mitzrayim, they didn't sing Shira. Not until V'yar Yisrael Sayad Gedolah Asher Asa Mitzrayim, V'aminu Ba'Hashem U'B'Moshe Avdo, Oz Yashir. Why? Because Shira is only on Shleimus, when you understand the whole story. That's why Ha'azino is a song. Not much of a song, right? My arrows grow drunk with your blood. I could skip that line, you know. But why is it a Shira? Because it takes you from Brias HaOlam until Mashiach. It's a total story. When the whole story is over, you sing Shira. They didn't see a hand. They saw individual things. When they came to Yam Suf and they suddenly saw how everything that happened fit together, Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Yisrael. Then they were able to sing. My friends, we are in terrible times. And I'll tell you what makes it even more terrible. You know, I wrote a book that I never get around to publishing. I only wrote it 35 years ago. But I mean to get around to it. As soon as I deal with my procrastination, but I keep putting it off. Anyway, it was called The Last Book You Read Before You Assimilate. And I describe it as a book for Judaism for people who don't want to read a book on Judaism, but just as an introduction. So one of the chapters is Jewish history. And I remember I had, after one incident, I said, the Jews lived happily ever after, which for Jews means about 30 years, right? We went through the first Intifada. We went through the second Intifada. And slowly, everything was getting better. We signed the Abraham Accords. Things were starting to look up. You know, things were getting under control. The economy was good. More countries were recognizing us. And then came Shmini Atzeres. And it's impossible to wrap your head around it. I still can't. How is it that we were able to start a beeper company and stick explosives in beepers and give them out to all of Hezbollah? So not only did we blow them up, we made money on the deal, you understand? Which is a typical Jewish approach. You see that in Parshas Shmos, where Yocheved gets money for nursing her own baby. That's how we Jews run, you understand? And we were able to do this and then blow up Hezbollah. It's unbelievable. And we didn't know this was coming? We couldn't see it. We couldn't get there. We couldn't stop. I have a podcast. Anybody knows. You can find it on Torah Anytime. It's on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify. But I interviewed this fellow who was the only ambulance down south on Shmini Atzeres. It was a Hatzalah. And Magen David Adam was not going. Why? Because they sent out one and it got blown up and they weren't sending any. The army didn't have any ambulances available. This one guy, one yeshiva guy, driving his little Hatzalah van, is driving around collecting as many injured people as he can, bringing them back and going back. I said, how'd you have supplies? He says, Hatzalah sent 2 giant trucks of supplies. I said, there was nobody else there? No. He says, well, what'd you do when you got them? So they wouldn't let me go in. They told all of the ambulances, you can't go in. This is a war zone. You're a bunch of yeshiva guys who are good for when a kid falls down and breaks his leg, you can take him to the hospital, but you're not supposed to be in a war zone. And he said, I wasn't Machal Shabbos and Yontif to sit here. I'm going in. He said, well, that's on you. No problem. And he says, so the other ambulances would drive them to the hospital. He says, until they brought in the plane. I said, what plane? The Hatzalah plane. I said, Hatzalah has a plane? Yeah. So Hatzalah has a plane, trucks of supplies, a bunch of ambulance, and there's nobody else there? Nobody. Not the whole day. I got in there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I finally finished 8 o'clock at night, and then other people started coming in. I just was collecting, soldiers. It's an absolutely fascinating story that he tells. That's how unprepared we were. We couldn't get an ambulance in there. We couldn't skylift some people. It's just unbelievable what was taking place. How do you understand it? Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu em ayin. I guess God forgot about us. I guess God turned his back on us. And I can't explain it. Unless there was somebody on the inside who was, and I'm not a conspiracy, well, I am a conspiracy theorist, but anyway, unless there was something inside of the government where people knew about this and decided to hide it. Because, the army really wants to bring down Netanyahu. I don't know if you know about this. They found a document where they said the protests in Israel are helping us, and the people are demanding this. This is helping Hezbollah. The Sinwar had written that memo. The army had the memo, and they wouldn't pass it on to Netanyahu. So there's this one from guy who was in the office there, who lives in Har Nof, and he passed it on to one of Netanyahu's people. He's sitting in jail to this day for telling the prime minister what the army already knew. So I don't know. I can't explain it. But I can tell you this. This past the Rosh Hashanah before this, people made a minyan in the streets in Tel Aviv, and people came and tore down the mechitza and chased them away and fought against it. And one of the girls who was released, one of the original hostages, she said, they told me, they watched the news, and they say, when I see the Israelis protesting against each other, and I see them fighting, I know we'll be successful. That's why we attacked. When we saw them all making demonstrations and attacking each other, I knew we could attack. Nothing's for nothing. Nothing happens by accident. So what's happening now? There were groups just making tzitzis. Soldiers couldn't get enough of them. Irreligious soldiers, ones who don't keep Torah and mitzvahs. Somebody told me they were at a secular beach, and there's all these secular Israelis. Nobody's wearing any clothes, but they all have their tzitzis. No yarmulkes, bathing suits and tzitzis. These people are starting to realize it. And isn't that the tragedy that I said at the beginning? Negative things motivate us more than positive things. All the positive things that were happening, all it did is we fought with each other even more. When you see somebody suddenly show up in shul and he's davening with a lot of kavanah, say, what happened? The answer is almost never. I was just looking at my life and I said, wow, everything's great. My kids are healthy. Everybody's healthy. I'm making a great living. All my kids are good kids. Everything's great. I decided now I should work on my spiritual life. Of course not. Someone's sick. Someone's dying. Someone died. My kid went off the derech. This went wrong. That went wrong. I'm going out of business. When we have problems, suddenly we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like we did when Amalek attacked, even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu did all these chasadim for us. We didn't see the Yad HaGadolah. We didn't see it all as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of everything. There was a poem written by this girl in Auschwitz that had the line, I believe in the sun even when I don't see it shining, and I believe in God even when I don't see his goodness. Each individual makkah, that wasn't a yad. It was a yad, but it wasn't hayad. But when they finally saw the Yam Suf and they saw Mitzrayim Meis al Sfas Hayom, and they saw that every Egyptian died according to the evil that they did. This one fell like lead. This one kept bouncing up and down like straw. They saw everybody get what was coming to them. They understood there's a system. My friends, Amalek, the Yetzer Hara, all of the forces that work against us want you to believe the world is random. Things don't count. Things don't matter. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu l'Ayin. Does the Kadosh Baruch Hu really care about me? That's his goal. Because then we won't work so hard. But if I know that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is listening to every word that I say, when I know that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of everything in my life, and I may not always see it right away, life is not an O. Henry short story. It's a Dickens novel with 1 million characters, and they keep reappearing over and over again. You think, oh, this guy was a little small character. Poof, here he is again. Then he pops up again. Yeah, that's life. You don't understand where things are happening. Rabbi say, whether you realize it or not, you are the most important people in the world. I'm not saying that to be nice because it's not part of my nature. Yeah, I'm telling it to you because it's a Metzias. How many Jews are there left in the world? And of those, how many are really Jewish? And of those, how many are willing to acknowledge that they're Jewish? The fastest growing group in the Jewish people is disaffiliated. People just say, I was Jewish, my family was Jewish, but I'm not. And of those people, how many of them are committed to Torah and mitzvahs? And of those people, how many decided to come and learn in Eretz Yisrael for a year? And of those people who came to learn in Eretz Yisrael for a year, how many of them chose a serious yeshiva like this? As opposed to, I won't name names, but you know what I'm thinking of. I don't speak Lashon Hara, but I'll tell you who does. Anyway, So, do you understand how precious you are in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When you daven, when you give someone a bracha, when you learn something, the malachim all standing around cheering for you. So when you hear somebody say, someone should do something, that someone is you. Because you are the most important people in Kallah Yisrael. Yeah, there are people who grew up with it, went to, whatever, and had it real easy their whole life. I had a guy when I taught in Derech, he came in, he didn't know how to read or write, Hebrew, he didn't have anything. And he used to play basketball with these guys from the Mir. And he says, I'm really jealous of you. You got your life made. You're in the Mir, you come from the right family, you'll get a power shidduch, your father-in-law will support you, everything's fine for you. And the guy says, really? Because I'm jealous of you. You're jealous of me? He says, I'll give you a mashal. Turns out someone told me this is in the Reader's Digest. Good enough. Anyway, so I'll give you a mashal. These two guys are out hiking. And suddenly this bear appears. Big grizzly bear. Arr! So one of them drops to the ground and starts tying his sneakers. And his friend says, what are you doing? You can't outrun a bear. And he says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. Understand? He says, I'm just running against the next guy in the mirror. I just have to be better than him. But you're running against the bear. My friends, you're running against the bear. You have the opportunity to become somebody great. And whether you realize it or not, Kallah Yisrael needs you. Hayad Hagadayla. You have to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world and understand nothing is random. Everything is with a purpose. And if you understand that, then you will know. I'll tell you a really terrible thing. I met many times from people who say to me, I don't think it matters to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if I live or die. I said, listen, he has no shortage of ways of getting rid of you. So if you're still here, he obviously thinks there's something that you can do. And everybody has something in this world that they can do that nobody else can do. Everybody in this world has a mission. And everybody here is essential. And all I ask is that you take a little time to think about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has expectations for you to do great things in this world. And in Mirza Hashem, we will, in these parshios, come out of the Golus and go into the Geula. Mirza Hashem. Thank you very much.